Some of you may have heard of a doctor named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Kubler-Ross lived and died in the 20th century, and she was known for her work with dying people. She spent a lot of time with people who were dying, fighting cancer. She would work with them all the way up to the point of their death. And so she really became an expert on the death process. And she developed some really strong opinions about what happens after we die. Well, there's one man in particular that who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her latter years. His name was Joe, and she wrote about him in one of her last books. Joe was a highly successful businessman. He had done so well. He had achieved all his goals. He was rolling. It seemed like he was in control of everything. If he wanted something done, he was the kind of person who knew somebody who could pull a string. It could happen. It did happen. Then one day, he found himself up against something he could not control. For the first time in his life, he could not control it. He found a spot on his neck, discovered it was lymphoma. And Joe said, immediately, I switched from being a very hard-working businessman to being a very hard-working cancer patient. And some of you know what I'm talking about. When I say hard-working cancer patient, that's not just a joke. That's when you have a disease like that, it's a full-time job just to get the treatment and to do all the things that you got to do in order to get well. Now, fortunately, Joe, because he was driven, because he was a type A personality, and he got things done, he did all the stuff necessary to beat cancer, and he did. But Joe said he was at his very last chemotherapy treatment, and as they were hooking up the IV, he smiled and thought, yeah, I've beat it. And it was a wonderful feeling. But the very next thought gave him a sick, sinking feeling. Because you know what the next thought was? Yes, I've survived. Yes, I'm going to live. But for what? Why has God spared me? Is it because he wants me to go back and make even more money than I was making before? Does God want me to go back and cut even bigger deals than I was cutting before? Why am I here? Why did God spare me? Joe didn't know. Do you know? Do you know who you are? Do you know why you're here? You might assume that Joe was not a Christian because if our first instinct is to say, well, Joe didn't know who he was. He didn't know himself as a child of God. He didn't know he was here to become a servant of Christ. There are plenty of Christian people who do not know who they are and do not know why they're here. Half the people in churches all across this country this morning, they don't know why they're here. They're not even sure they know why they're at church. I'm telling you, very impressive Christian people can have this problem. When I was a kid, I watched a lot of Christian programming. I watched the Christian Broadcasting Network a lot. I watched those preachers. And one of my favorite shows was called the 700 Club. Some of y'all remember 700 Club. It had Pat Robertson. And he had different co-hosts over the years. But my favorite was this Scottish lady named Sheila Walsh. Sheila Walsh was easy on the eyes. Sheila Walsh was enjoyable to listen to because she had this Scottish accent. She was cute. She could sing. She'd written books. She was funny. I mean, she balanced out Pat Robertson, who just was kind of a blob sitting over there. And somehow I went off to college and wasn't able to watch the 700 Club. And later in the 90s, I tuned back in, but Sheila Walsh wasn't there. I wondered, whatever happened to Sheila Walsh? And then, just a few years ago, I read an article in Leadership magazine, and it was an interview with Sheila Walsh. I read it and immediately understood what happened to her. Here's what she said. This is a quote. She said, in 1992, my life hit a wall. One morning, I was seated on national television in my business suit and my inflatable hairdo. And that night, I was locked in the psychiatric ward of a hospital. And she said the next day, a psychiatrist came in to see her. He was a Christian psychiatrist who sat down level with her and looked her in the eyes, and he asked her this question, Sheila Walsh, who are you? And she said, well, that's easy. I'm the co-host of the 700 Club. The doctor said, no, don't give me that. Don't give me that. Who are you? Oh, well, who am I? I'm an author. I'm a singer. I'm even a speaker. Come on now, Sheila. Tell me. Who are you, Sheila? Sheila got real quiet. She began to tear up, and she finally said, I don't know. I don't know. Right, the doctor said, and that's why you're here. And I want to ask you, do you know who you are? Do you know why you're here? I already said it in the beginning. Let me say it again. All across America today, there are plenty of Christians sitting in church who don't know why they're there. They don't know why they're in this world. They don't know who they are. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of them has to do with a business meeting that went on in hell some time back. Business meeting in hell. Apparently they have business meetings there. The devil was in charge. He had his gavel and he quieted all the demons down. Here's what he said to them. He said, boys, we got to do something about these Christians. I'm starting to get really frustrated because here's what I see happening. When they get really connected with Jesus Christ, we lose our power over them. We lose our influence over them because they discover a reason for living, and they discover that He's put them here, and they grow and they work. They try to become more like Him, and they share Him with others. We got to stop this. We cannot let this keep happening. And all the demons said, yeah, boss, but what are we going to do? How do you stop something that powerful? And the devil said, well, it's pretty simple. Here's what we got to do. We've got to make sure that those Christian people stay very, very busy with the non-essentials of life. We've got to teach them to spend, and borrow, and create a lot of unnecessary financial stress to keep up their frantic, upscale, empty lifestyle. We got to get them so busy that they really don't have time for their children or their spouse. And what will happen then is that their families will start to break down. And when the families break down, the church starts to break down. But we can't stop at that. Oh, no, no, no. When they're riding in their automobiles, make sure the radio is always on. And if the radio's not on and they're under 40, make sure they're listening to iTunes. And when they come home in the afternoon, always have the TV going. And have a different family member in each room watching a different TV, unless one of them is on his iPhone. This is what we've got to do. We're going to send them junk mail through the snail mail, email. We're going to keep them preoccupied with the non-essentials of life. And here's what's going to happen. They're going to forget who they are. They're going to forget why they're here. And all the demons said, yes, yes, boss. It'll work. You know what? It works. Chuck Swindoll knows it works. He says that one of the reasons we fill our lives with so much non-essential busyness is that many of us would feel guilty if we ever stopped, got alone, got quiet, and simply sat in the presence of God. We would actually feel guilty because we think we got to be doing, going all the time. But Chuck Swindoll went on and he said, here's the main reason people don't want to be alone. Here's the main reason they want to stay busy. As long as they're busy, the busyness acts like a drug. It gives them a high. It makes them feel important. It makes them feel like they're really counting for something. And then think about the comparison of busyness to, say, being drunk. You've heard it all your life. You've seen it. A drunk man thinks he's 10 foot tall. He can take on anybody. Well, busyness can make you feel so important, so successful, that you think you're a little superior to those people who are not quite so busy. In fact, there's only one thing that these busy people like better than being busy. You know what that is? They like for other people to notice how busy they are. Because that really feels good. That really makes them think, yeah, I'm doing pretty well here. I'm accomplishing a whole lot. Well, do you know, it's possible to stay very, very busy doing nothing of eternal value. A lot of us think that as long as we're busy, we're using our time well. And if we're not busy, we're wasting time. In some ways, and sometimes that's true. But I'm telling you, busyness can cause you to waste your whole life. Cause you to forget who you are. I told you what Chuck Swindoll said about people not wanting to be alone. Let me add this. One reason people can't stand to be alone with their own thoughts is that when they're alone, there's nobody to talk to, there's no television, radio, internet. They're forced to look at themselves as they really are. And questions start coming up that they don't want to answer. Questions like, who are you? Why are you here? What happened to that relationship with God that used to be so close? Where'd that go? Those kind of questions, a lot of us don't want to hear and sure as heck don't want to answer. one of my favorite sayings is, the truth will set you free, but first it's going to make you mad. When you hear the truth about yourself, when you discover some of these truths, it's going to make you mad, but ultimately it can make you disgusted with living a life that's shallow. Living a life that's all about staying busy on non-essentials. Well, the Bible tells us about a lady who was like that. Her name was Martha. She was an awfully busy woman, and she felt terribly important. We're told about her in Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 38. Let's read it together. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed them into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted. Hear that word? Distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken from her. Suppose you ask Martha, as she was preparing that big meal, Martha, who are you? She'd have said, oh, well, I'm a hostess. No, Martha. Who are you? I'm a cook. I'm a housekeeper. Martha, who are you? You know what her answer would have had to have been? I don't know. And that's why I'm so busy trying to impress Jesus here, because I don't know what else to do with myself. Mary, on the other hand, she knew who she was. She knew she was a child of God. She was a follower of Christ. And she was taking full advantage of every opportunity to sit at his feet quietly and just listen to his words. Martha felt pretty important, and yet she was busy on the non-essentials of life. Jesus recognized that. Read the Gospels. Pay attention to how Jesus spent his time. Pay attention. I've read through the Gospels looking for that very thing. How did Jesus spend his time? And it really came down to three categories. Every time you read about Jesus, he was either working, praying, or spending quality time with people. Never see Jesus busy with non-essentials. He was always working. When he worked, when he was healing, when he was teaching, when he worked, he worked. And that's all he was doing. And when he prayed, he prayed. He didn't pray for 5 minutes. He prayed all night. And when he sat down to have conversations with people about their spiritual lives, his mind was totally focused on the person he was talking to. There was no non-essential wasted time in Jesus' life. Now, Martha was distracted. I'll say this for her. She did know that Jesus was important. And she knew that it was important to hear what he was saying. And let me say this about that. There are plenty of Christian people who know Jesus is important. You ask them, what's the most important thing in life? They'll say Jesus. And then you ask them, well, how much time do you spend sitting at his feet listening to his words? And they'll say, I'm going to get around to that one of these days. Maybe when I retire and I have more time. But right now, I just got too much else going on. Right now, I'm just too busy. I don't have time right now. When I was a teenager, I knew a man in his 40s who was constantly saying that. He had studied the Bible a lot and gotten really close to God back when he was in college. But once he got married and life started, that just went completely to the back burner. And he would talk with me about the Bible and Christ because we were both interested in that to a point. But he would always say, now, right now, I don't have time to really do much of that, but you wait till I retire. When I retire, I'm going to pour myself into that. I'm going to do nothing but that. Well, I saw him week before last in Alabama. He's in his 70s now. He's still very busy. He's very busy watching television. He's very busy on his ham radio. He's very busy thinking up projects that he needs to hire people to do around his house. He can hardly get out of a chair, but he's still too busy to actually read a scripture and pray. Don't put off your relationship with God for some time that will probably never come. That's what Martha was doing. And when we do that, when we stay busy on non-essentials, we get burned out on life. We got so many different plates spinning that we can't possibly keep them all going. And we're stressed out and we're nervous trying to keep it all going. And the reality is, half those plates we could drop and never miss them. But then we get burned out and upset and complain to God. God, don't you see how hard I'm working here? I got so much going on. Well, why have you overloaded me like this? You know what the answer is? God didn't load you down with all that. Now, God does expect some things from his people. A man is supposed to work. He's supposed to make a living for his family. We're supposed to attend our kids' ball games, and we're supposed to serve people through the church. You know, we're supposed to work, pray, and spend quality time with people. That's what we're supposed to do. My question is, what else do you do? And how much energy and time is it taken away from you? If you're going to complain about how busy you are, there's one condition. You got to be willing to ask yourself honestly, how much of this stuff is really essential? Get alone in a room with the TV off and ask God that question. How much of this is really not essential? One of the first and best books I read when I was just starting my ministry was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of those habits was called sharpen the saw. And here's the idea. If you're sawing away, and you saw long enough, your blade's going to start getting dull. But you don't want to stop sawing and waste all that time of sitting down, getting out your little file and sharpening the teeth. You don't have time for that. So you just keep sawing, and it gets harder and harder because it actually cuts less and less. It gets harder and harder, cutting less and less. So Covey says, take time to sharpen your saw. You know, God says the same thing. That's what the Sabbath is all about. Remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy? That's the one day you sharpen your saw. That's the one day when you really don't have much unnecessary stuff. Well, let me rephrase that. You do have plenty of unnecessary stuff. But that's the one day you can disregard almost everything else. And you know, have you ever thought of it? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's not just a suggestion. That's one of the 10 commandments. I know, but it feels so good to be busy, and people see how busy I am, and they're impressed by that. Well, let me say this. There's nothing impressive about having a nervous breakdown. There's nothing impressive about having a heart attack when you're 45. And Jesus was not impressed with what Martha was doing, even though she was working herself silly. He was not impressed. His attention was on Mary. I gotta make a clarification now, though. I've been spending most of my time talking about Martha, all the mistakes she was making, busy. And preachers have always done that. I bet every sermon you ever heard on Mary and Martha, Martha was the one that wasn't doing right. You know, Martha must hate preachers. She might be waiting inside the gate of heaven with a Coca-Cola bottle to... Martha, I got to balance this out. Being like Martha's not a bad thing. Being a doer, being driven, being an achiever, that's a good thing. The Marthas are those 20% of the people who do 80% of the work. In business and in church. That's the Marthas do that. And so there's nothing wrong with it. And there actually can be something wrong with being too much of a Mary. You've heard of people who are so heavenly minded they're of no earthly good. They're really, all they ever really do is supposedly spend time with God, often in the bed. What I'm saying is, first of all, we need both kinds, but I'm going to say something deeper than that, much more important than that. You need to be both. I need to be both. There needs to be a part of me that works hard, that focuses on a task and doesn't rest until it's complete. There also needs to be a part of me that recognizes when enough is enough and can turn it off. Turn off the phone. Turn off the computer. You got to be able to do both. And here's what makes that hard. Everybody in this room has a tendency, your natural tendency is to be a Mary or a Martha. Some of you are type A personalities. You got to always be accomplishing something. That's good. That's good. That part of it is going to come easy to you. So don't throw that away. But you got to balance it out by spending that devotional type time with Christ, that quiet time, that alone time. And if you don't do it, you may accomplish a lot. You'll climb way up the ladder and realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. And then others are just natural born prayers and spiritual seekers, and this part comes easy to us. We love to get along with God, and that's a very good thing. Very good thing. Don't stop it. It's the most important thing. But you better get in the kitchen sometime. It's okay to sit there. You need to sit there and listen to the words of Jesus while he's talking, and Martha's fixing supper, but after supper, you probably need to do the dishes. I'm saying both of us need both. You need to decide this too. What are you? Are you a human being or a human doing? What most of us really believe is that we are human doings. I am what I do. Like Sheila Walsh, I host the 700 Club. I write books. I sing. That's not who you really are. You're a human being, and who you are is a child of God. And if you're not yet, you can be. You're a child of God. That's who you are. Now, once an old man was sitting on a bench, and a young man walked by, sat down beside him, and the young man looked at the old man and said, "Could you tell me, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here?" He was basically asking, who am I? And the old man said, without missing a beat, "You're here to serve other people. That's why you're here, serve other people." And the young man pondered on that for a second. I'm here to serve other people. Why are they here? To serve me? What I'm saying is, serving other people is very good. It's important, but that's not why you're here. You are here as a child of God to grow more and more like Christ. And the more like Christ you grow, the more you're able to help people. Because you'll have something to give them. You'll have something that they would want. It's a sad thing when Christian people say, "Oh, I just want my neighbor to know the Lord the way I do." Now, do you really? Would he be better off knowing the Lord the way you do? Make sure you really know the Lord. Make sure that's your priority. People will see you know him. They'll be drawn to it. As Ian comes, I want to tell you, I've got a little squirrel dog at home. Her name is Tiny. She was born to tree squirrels. She's high energy, even though she's probably over 10 years old. Went walking the other day, and she went to 4 or 5 different trees. She's always chasing something, always sniffing the ground. But I've noticed one thing about Tiny. When I pull into the driveway in the evening, no matter what, Tiny is sniffing, no matter what she's chasing. No matter how many squirrels there are in the tree, she turns and runs straight to her master. She sits at his feet and looks up. And she and her master have a sweet little time there. And I'm telling you this, I know you have some essential business. There are some squirrels you gotta chase. But just make sure you know when to stop chasing. Make sure you know who you are. And you're reminded of who you are as you sit at his feet daily, listening to his words.